Namely, question number 1. What does the Almighty need prayer for? Why did He tell man to pray? Why did He instruct man? He should tell him a story of distress and torment. After all, the Rikin formulated those questions. God is omnipotent, omniscient. He knows best what man needs and what is indispensable for his salvation and welfare. Why does God want man to pray? Why does the Almighty wait with the bestowal of salvation and grace upon man until man offers his prayer? Why shouldn't God act immediately in accordance with the biblical promise? Before they will call me, I shall answer. While they'll be praying, I'll hearken to their prayer and I'll fulfill their request. This is question number 1. Question number 2 is as follows. If God wills man, to suffer, how can prayer change His inscrutable, infinite, and unalterable will? Can the word of man influence the verdict by the Almighty? God is not a man who should disappoint. He is not the son of man. He should regret and change his decision. Of course, you all know, you all understand that there is only one answer to both questions. And the answer is simple and plain. Not the Almighty, but man changes through prayer. God hearkens to prayer because there is a change in the identity of man. For instance, if the Midat Hadin, a strict verdict, was about to be decreed against Mr. A, by praying, man attains another identity. And by attaining a new identity, the verdict is not applicable anymore to him. The task of my lecture tonight is to find out how does this transformation or metamorphosis of the human being, of identity of the personality, transpire, and in what does it consist? As a matter of fact, the answer to these two questions is a universal answer to all problems pertaining to mitzvahs. When you got not away, if you are righteous, what does God does not benefit by it. So the answer is God doesn't benefit, but man benefits by it. And since man benefits by it, God wants man to perform the mitzvahs. And the same is true of prayer. There is a change of course. There's a change of identity, a change of personality, a transformation of the basic tendencies of the personality, which is accomplished through prayer and by prayer. And that's what saves man and protects man. And what makes it possible for prayer to be accepted and fulfilled. In order to understand this, we have to also to analyze a very strange equation in the Halacha, extremely strange, namely that of Tefillah and Geula. The significance of this union of Tefillah and Geula was stressed quite frequently by Chazal, by our sages. Just to quote one minor, because I have no time, just to quote many. Omer Rabbi Yechone, Eizu ben Olam Haba, Ze Aseiya Geula L'Tefillah, the Aris. Who is the share in the world to come? The one who recites the evening prayer immediately upon the conclusion of the blessing of Geula, Glorious Yisrael. What is here actually the transition from Geula to Tefillah? It's not only a transition, it's more than that. It is an equation. What does this equation signify? By analyzing the equation between Geula and Tefillah, we'll come to the very crux of Tefillah, as Yehadus understands. Redemption is a basic category in Judaic thinking in our history. As a matter of fact, our history was initiated by the divine act of redemption, of Geula. We'll pretty soon celebrate the Passover, and Passover is the Chag HaGeula, the festival of redemption. That's all. We also believe that Jewish history will be consummated and realized in the eschatological or messianic age, again by divine act of Geula, of redemption. What is Geula? As a matter of fact, it's a very strange phenomenon. Chazal were very careful to use Geula only with regard to two events. One event which lies in the past, the second event which we expect to transpire in the future, namely the Tzias Mitzrayim and the Geula Asidah, the Geula HaMashiach. For instance, take such an important event in history as Hanukkah, or an important event in history which we are going to celebrate this week on Tuesday, as Purim. Chazal never applied the term Geula, either to Hanukkah or to Purim. Interesting is that Geula, translated into Aramaic, is Pulkon. They did use Pulkon, but not Geula. Pulkon. Pulkon Kayim Hazeh. Islam says it's a true Geula, Pulkon Kayim Hazeh. Sure salvation, yes, it's applicable to all events. All events. However, Geula, Chazal restricted just to two major events. It means to the event which initiated Jewish history, the event which is responsible for the whole historical occurrence, and the event which we will fulfill and realize the great promise, the eschatological messianic promise. Geula is either Geulat Mitzrayim or Geula HaMashiach. And there is somehow a mysterious equation between Geula and Tefillah. That's the reason for Smichas Geula with Tefillah, that the preceding Broche should end with the word Go'al Yisrael. What is Geula? I believe that Geula is characteristic, I would like you to listen carefully, characteristic of one basic change that occurs. The shift of a community or an individual from the periphery of being from periphery of history to the center of history. Or the change from a non-historical to a historical existence. What's the difference between those two existences? A historical and a non-historical existence. What's the difference? What does the history-making and history-involved collective do that the history non-involved group doesn't do? The answer, I believe, is simple. A history-making existence is a communicative, speaking existence. It is blessed with the charisma of the word, of the logos. A historical existence is a storytelling existence. It narrates its story to whoever is ready to listen. While the non-historical existence is non-communicative, non-charismatic, has no message, it has no story to tell, no message to deliver. Moreover, it is a mute silent existence. A silent being is ontological, a peripheral being. Gula, as I have emphasized above, shifts a historically peripheral collective toward the center. In other words, a silent people is by the miraculous power of Gula transformed into a talking, self-expressive, and storytelling people. A mute life is identified with bondage, slavery. A speaking, storytelling life is a free life. The slave has no story to tell. His existence is non-history making. The free people are a storytelling people. Anyone who cares to listen may hear their story. To sum up what we said before, Gula means the centripetal movement, the shift from the silent periphery toward the living center, full of color and sound. Why is this slave silence? It's a little enigmatic now, I will explain. Why is the slave silent? Why is he mute? I mean, the characteristic trait of the slave is his muteness, his silence. The free man is vocal. He's speaking. He has a story to tell, and he likes to tell to people his story. Why is the slave silent? Why is he mute? The slave is silent because he's insensitive. He lacks, what I say, the tragic awareness of suffering, which is a part of human dignified existence. He lacks the very perception of human pain. At this juncture, let me distinguish between two basic phenomena. People confuse them sometimes. Pain as a sensation and pain as awareness. And instead of saying pain as awareness, I would say suffering. I mean, usually suffering means awareness of pain. It's both. If you use suffering in its transitive meaning and also in its intransitive meaning, I can suffer pain, I can suffer shame, I can suffer disgrace, I can suffer, I can suffer agony, misery, or I can say I suffer, and that's all, without in intransitive form. Suffering is more the awareness of pain, not the sensation of pain. What's the difference between the awareness of pain and sensation of pain? Pain as a sensation is completely fenced in within the realm of physiology, and which is usually connected with this yeast tissue or pathology. Let's say it is a simple physiological sensation. The body reacts to any pathology, or to any disease, usually with pain. Aristotle said that pain is the most blessed thing God has ever bestowed upon man. Because pain is the signal of danger. It's the alarm. It's an alarm system within the human body. If people had no pain, they would never know that they are sick. And they could not cure themselves. You know very well, sometimes one, God forbid, is not warned by pain about a certain internal disease, how tragic the consequences are many a time. So let us distinguish between the sensation of pain and the awareness of pain. Sensation of pain is a physiological phenomenon, nothing else. Like sensation of light, like any other sensation. While the awareness of pain is a state of mind. It is a deep mental anguish. In a word, the awareness of pain is not a sensation, but a spiritual experience. Not always is suffering or the awareness of pain associated with the sensation of pain. And vice versa. Quite often, a person goes through long torment, agonizing suffering, without feeling any pain. Let us take a simple example. A woman who eagerly waited the arrival of a child, who prayed and petitioned God vehemently, passionately, like Hannah of old. That woman is certainly exposed to pain as a sensation when she is in labor. It's a natural phenomenon. It's due to the conversions of the womb, the contraction, the conversions of the womb. However, she has the sensation of pain. However, you can hardly say that this woman suffers, or she has the awareness of pain. I mean the negative, disjunctive awareness of pain. On the contrary, pain somehow in a strange way is connected with a feeling of happiness, elation, joy. On the other hand, we know of long, agonizing torments and deep anguish which cannot be traced to pain, to physiological pain. As I said before, pain is a sensation, a physiological reaction on the part of the organism to any kind of abnormality or pathology. The response is mechanical, instinctual, immediate, and is not restricted to the human race. Animal knows pain too. While suffering is an experience, a spiritual reality with which the human being is confronted. It is present when does a person suffer, not when he has pain. Quite often, yes, but not always. I give you an example. A person suffers only when he is involved in a situation in which either he loses his existential security, it means simply he is confronted with death, there is danger involved, in a disease, or he is stripped of his values when dignity and his dignity in inner words are questioned. Then there is suffering. Then there is disharmony between the environment and the human being. Then you can speak of suffering, awareness of pain. The slave is exposed to pain, so is the animal. And when he meets with pain, he may react in the same way the animal does, the brute does. Namely, it is uttering a sharp, a shrill sound, or is a howl. However, like the howl of the brute, which dies suddenly in the darkness of the night, so is the shriek of the slave. Everything is, in a split second, everything is silent again. There is no complaint, there is no protest, there is no request, there is no question why and what. The agonizing howl is heard for an infinitesimal period of time. It is mechanical, instinctual, due to convulsive reflections of the body. Yet the slave never cries in a human fashion, never moves. For those sounds are characteristic of the human being. There is meaning to crying, sighing, mourning. They express human experiences like grief, fear, or sometimes joy. Crying demonstrates suffering, while the howl of the brute demonstrates pain as a sensation. The slave knows not suffering and anguish. He is insensitive to insult. He does not feel the disgrace and the degradation of being in bondage. Inmates of the concentration camps told me, I spoke with many, that in this passage of time, they got used to everything and nothing disturbed them. They were totally anesthetized, totally, against suffering and certainly against pain. And also sometimes against pain. Even the sharpness of pain was considerably reduced. So were our ancestors in Egypt, who were born into slavery, into Beit Avodim, who never enjoyed freedom, who never knew what a free life is, and they considered that fear and torture and bondage as the normal phenomena. They did not miss anything. Quite interesting is the following passage in the Zohar, in Vayero. I believe it is Zohar 12. When Moshe told the Almighty in Bnei Yisrael Yishomu Elai, Ve'ich Yishmoini Parei, V'ani Aralt Fasoin, behold, the children of Israel have not hearkened unto me. How then shall Pharaoh hear me, who am of uncircumcised believed? So the Zohar says as follows. I'll read it in Aramaic, then I'll translate it. Moshe Kolo, Moses possessed the voice. The Dibur, the Iyu Mila, delay, have a bigoluse. However, his speech was in bondage. And he could not pronounce the word. He had a voice, he was vocal. He could emit a shriek, a cry, but he couldn't speak. He couldn't pronounce the word. ובגינדו, אומר, איך ישמענו פרעי, באי דמילה דילי, עד בגלוסה. And that's why his lips were uncircumcised. That's why he said, ואיך ישמענו פרעי. The words were not at his disposal. They were enslaved. A word is enslaved. It's interesting. When we speak about enslavement of man, the Zohar has the concept, the word is enslaved, the language is enslaved. I can utter sounds, but not words. Tochazi, that they have said. Come and see. Kozilne the dibur ave Kozimle, the dibur ave begeluse, kole historically. As a matter of fact, our ancestors in Egypt did not possess even a voice. They were completely silent. Kadosh Moshe, when Moshe appeared, the first time he appeared, you know, the two incidents, the two episodes. One is the first appearance of Moses in the camp of the slaves, in the so-called concentration camp of the slaves. When as a young man he came out and he met with the Egyptian, he was smiting the Jew, and with the two Jews quarreling. Kadosh Moshe, when Moshe appeared, also called, the voice appeared with him. When Moshe had a call belenule, but none could pronounce a word. The Ochi and Moshe had no word, had no speech. At the Krivu Torah de Sinai, until they came to Mount Sinai. The Siyavete Reise, and the Torah was given to them. The Dozimne, at that time, at Mount Sinai, is Haber Kole Bedibur. So the voice joined the word. Or the voice was converted into speech. This is a verbatim translation of this here. Before Moses, there was not even a voice. The slaves were mute, silent. No sound was heard. No complaint was lodged. No sigh was uttered. Just agonizing, inhuman shriek or the howl that split the silence of the night, and which died immediately. The slaves were silent, gloomy, voiceless. The women did not cry when their infants were snatched away from their arms. Mothers told me from Zurich and Warsaw, when the Nazis used to snatch away their children, they did not shed a single tear. They did not cry. They couldn't cry. They were voiceless. There was no sound. They couldn't emit any sound. To emit a sound and to cry and to protest and to lodge a complaint and to ask why and what. And or sometimes to shout for help is a human experience. When one loses his human dignity, his freedom, he loses his speech, his voice. Before Moses came, as a young man, so it was the Goshen, the camp of the slaves, was a silent, voiceless, soundless camp. No one complained. No one understood that he is entitled to a complaint. He thought this is the way things should be. Therefore, don't forget that the Israelites were born into slavery already. They've never experienced a free life. So they couldn't distinguish. How can you distinguish colors? If you compare color. If you don't compare color, you cannot distinguish. How can one enjoy, resent slavery, bondage, if he experienced freedom, if he enjoyed freedom? If he has never experienced freedom, so why should he resent bondage? Speechless, soundless, they were drawn along the path of torture and endless torments. Complete muteness prevailed. When Moses came, the sound, the voice arrived. Why? Moses, by defending the helpless Jew, the helpless slave, whom the Egyptian was about to murder. Moses, by reproaching, rebuking the Jew, or the Jews who were quarreling, restored sensitivity to the slave. Restored pride, a certain sense of pride, to the downtrodden and oppressed Israelites. They instantly realized that all that pain and anguish and humiliation and endless torture are unwarranted, unjustified, unnatural, uncalled for. that all the cruel greed and injustice of man against his fellow man is evil. They didn't understand it before. Moses came, they didn't understand it, that this injustice, this inhuman treatment of helpless beings is uncalled for, is not justified. They made the great discovery that everyone is entitled to freedom, and if he is oppressed, it's unjust. This is the arrival of Moses. Then the first time they understood that evil is human madness and infringement of the norm of the natural law of morality. At that time, they began to suffer. Suddenly, the sensation of pain, which even the animal is exposed to, turned into awareness of pain. Awareness of pain implies not just a feeling of unpleasantness, more than that, protest, rebellion, complaint, request, and a plea for help. It's the first time. At once they began to moan, to cry, to accuse, to indict, to ask for a change, to demand justice and freedom. And how beautifully the verse in Exodus describes the change, which Moses' arrival and Moses' intervention brought about. ויהי בימים הרבים, ויומס מלך מצרים, ויהולכו בני ישראל מן העבודה, ויזעקו, ותעל שבוסם אלוקים מן העבודה. When was it? How long were the Jews in Egypt? I mean, it's very hard to say. But let us say a few hundred years. No. This story, ויהי בימים הרבים ההם, ויומס מלך מצרים, ויהולכו בני ישראל מן העבודה, ויזעקו, ותעל שבוסם אלוקים מן העבודה. And it came to pass in the course of those many, not days, as the standard translation says. Because yomim in Hebrew is years, not days. You say Arishas Yomim V'Shamim means year. And it came to pass in the course of those many years that the king of Egypt died, and the children of Israel sighed, the first sigh, by reason of the bondage, and they cried the first cry. And the cry came up unto God by reason of the bondage. Now there is one question. What is the question here of this body? There is a simple question. What question should be raised? Why didn't they cry before? Hundreds of years there. Hundreds of years in slavery, in bondage. Treated inhumanly. Children snatched away from the arms of their mother. Drowned in the Nile. Not a single Jew aside. Not a single Jew has emitted a cry. A human cry. A human note. Not the howl and the shriek of the brute and the beast. It was complete silence. In the youth, hundreds of thousands of Jews, all of them youth. And suddenly they began to cry. They began to sigh. And they began to beg, to rebel, to protest, and to demand justice. So the question is simple. Why didn't they sigh before the Moshe episode? This follows immediately the story about the Moshe episode. When Moshe fled to Midian, ויהי ביום הרב מועד. Why did he not sigh before the Moshe episode? Why didn't they cry in course of hundreds of years prior to Moses' appearance? You know why? Because their existence was a mute, silent one. Because they lacked perceptivity of suffering. They lacked awareness of pain. There was a howl, an infrequent shriek. There was no human crying. However, a slave lacks something else. Even the great Moses did not as yet reach the center. The very moment they started to cry, they began to move from the historical periphery, I would rather say from the periphery of being, toward the center. There was this centripetal movement. Because the moment he began to cry, he moved from the periphery toward the center. He acquired something human. Not much as yet. Just emotional awareness of suffering, of mental anguish. Stress. Stress is also more in a spiritual sense. The awareness of being trapped, of being in narrow straits. Yes, the first step was made. The people were not the silent people anymore. They became not the speaking people as yet. But what kind of a people did they become? A vocal people. There was voice to them, nothing else. You can have a voice, but it's too far from speech. Silence is a result of non-sensitivity. And while sound comes with the birth of sensitivity to suffering, speech comes later with the appearance of the logos, of understanding. It's not enough just to feel the abnormality or the anomaly of a situation. It's not enough just to feel, what shall I say, pain, anguish, or to have the awareness of suffering, of pain. More is required. I've got to understand it. So the Zohar says, yes, Moses heard a voice. He felt the anomalous character, the human madness, and the injustice which is involved in the whole institution of slavery. But Moses was still speechless. He had a voice, but not speech. He could cry, he could moan, he could shout for help, but he did not know how to express himself. What does it mean? He still did not understand by what means this situation can be changed. All right? He cannot change the situation. Even he alone cannot change the situation. All right, he can defend a single Jew. But he had to flee Egypt. There is pain awareness and pain understanding. Pain understanding goes hand in hand with speech. However, even the great Moses did not as yet reach the center of historical existence. For a while he was vocal, not silent. He realized the abnormality and absurdity of the situation. And while he was the first one to emit the first cry, human cry, to disturb the non-historical silence, he did not achieve yet complete understanding of the situation that prevailed. He did not know what to do in order to change a monstrous reality. He felt intuitively the shame and disgrace of such an existence, yet he failed to realize what action must be taken in order to remedy the situation. He protested, yelled, it means he had a voice. He killed the slave driver, yelled, he defended the Jew, he rebuked the Jew who lost his dignity and kindness. However, he did not believe that anything can be accomplished in order to change the situation. He felt the pain, he was filled with indignation, rebellion, yelled, shouted. He was not silent, yet he still was in the state of darkness and impotence as to the future. Everything seemed to be chaotic, confusing, and bewildering. Moses made a great step forward. He broke the silence. The existence began to move from the silent periphery toward the loud center. The community became a vocal one. But however, it was yet far from a speaking existence. It was not mute anymore. Nevertheless, it was still a wordless existence. Kadose Moshe Ose Kole. When Moses appeared, the call came, the voice. But however, Moshe had a callable mile. He had a voice, he had no speech. Speech is a representative of understanding, of realizing not only the situation is bad, what can be done in order to remedy the situation, in order to change it. He was still on a house for sign. He had uncircumcised lips. The word of his lettings. He was still in exile. The word was never there. They proved that Moshe did not believe that it's possible to take the Jews out of Egypt or to free them, to deliver them from bondage. Is the proof that he left Egypt, went off to what? To Midian, and he stayed there a long, long time. Vayigdal Moshe vayetze Lochov. Moshe grew up and he came out to his brother. How old was he? I mean, it's very hard. There are different medrashim. How old was Moses? What would you say? He was a lad. How old was he? Let's say 15, 16, 18 years. When Moses came as the Redeemer, charged by the Almighty with the task of delivering the Jews and taking them out of Egypt and making a people out of slaves. How old was he? 80 years old. And in 60 years, Moshe was away from Mitzrayim. Moshe gave up. And then suddenly, unexpectedly, Moses came, Moses found himself in the Sinai Peninsula, and he saw the burning bush. And the great dialogue between Moses and the Almighty was initiated. But Moshe gave up. He felt the shame. He didn't know how to act. HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him later. And in that effect, Moses had a long debate with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Moses was very skeptical that a Jew is capable of achieving freedom. He thought his experience with the Shnei Ivrim meeting, the two Jews quarreling, was a very traumatic experience for Moses. Convinced him that there is no remedy. Moses spent many years in a state of lassitude, exhaustion, and despair. He did not believe in Geburah. He had no word. He had no message. Only God compelled him to become the Redeemer, the Messiah. And the Zohar says very well, do you know when Moses understood everything? The whole Jewish destiny, why slavery was necessary, why the people, had to spend hundreds of years in Egypt and then be taken out of the land of bondage. When he understood everything, Jewish destiny, past and future and present, when? At Mount Sinai. And the Torah was given, Moses understood the purposiveness and the teleology of the chapter of slavery and freedom. In the light of above said, we may say that the road from Avdus to Geula, from slavery to redemption, is divided into two parts. The movement from a silent to a vocal reality. Second, the further progress from a vocal reality to a speaking reality. The first movement is the consequence of the awakening of the affectional sensitivity, of the awareness of pain. The second is due to the birth of the logos, or human understanding of suffering and how to deal with suffering. Now, let us change the topic. There is not only political slavery, my friends. There is also ontological slavery, or existential slavery as well. Slavery is not only a political, juridic institution, which has been abolished long ago. It is more than that. It is a way of life, a modus existential. A man may possess all the political freedoms in the world and yet be a slave existentially. You would ask me, in what manner does existential slavery express itself? I'll answer this question. In the same manner as political slavery, namely in a silent, mute existence, which is not acquainted with suffering. It's acquainted with pain, but not with suffering. It's acquainted with the sensation of pain, not with the awareness of distress. The Avodim Yinu, the Father of the Mitzrayim, tells us not only about the slavery of a community in a political juridic sense, but also about the slavery of an individual in existential ontological fashion. Let me read to you just a few sentences from a Yiddish story written by Pat. I believe his description of a certain type is exactly the description of a slave, an existential slave. I'll read it in Yiddish. I'll translate it to English. He writes as follows. Da auf der Welt hat Bonche Schweig steht, gar keinen einzigen Eindruck nicht gemacht. Fragt ihn jetzt in der Herren, wer Bonche ist gewesen. Bonche hat still gelebt und ist still gestorben. Wer Schotten ist durch unsere Welt. Auf Bonches Bries hat man kein Wein nicht getrunken. Es haben kein Käses nicht geklungen. Zu der Mitzwe hat kein Klinge der Drosche nicht gesagt. Gelebt hat wie ein groi klein Kerndl auf Samt beim 13 Jahren, zwischen Millionen seinesgleichen. Und als der Wind hat aufgegeben, ein Kerndl und als übergeworfen auf der anderen Seite, hat es keiner nicht bemerkt. Bonche Schweig's death made no impression whatsoever. No one knew who Bonche was. Bonche lived mutely and died quietly. Like a silent shadow, did he cross our world. A bunch of circumcision, no toes were drunk. Glasses were not clunked. No one cleans glasses. At Bar Mitzvah, no rousing droshe was delivered. He lived in anonymity like a grey, minute grain of sand on the beach of a stormy sea among millions of identical sand particles. No one noticed that the storm picked up one particle and carried it across the sea. And let me tell you, there are people who live on the outskirts or fringes of being. They are faceless and nameless. No one is interested in them. No one is concerned to breathe or over them. No one rejoices in their presence, and no one bemoans their absence. They come and go like this spirit figure without leaving a trace or making a mark. They are forgotten people. And when I come to the cemetery, I see that the cemeteries are full of them. The death notice, if such a notice does appear in the press, or the tombstone, if the wind didn't carry it away, are the only reminder that somebody existed sometimes somewhere. For it comes, ki b'hevel bo, u'b'cheshech yelech, u'b'cheshech shmei yechuseh. For it comes in vanity, and depart in darkness, and the name thereof is covered with darkness. Those people have, like our ancestors in Egypt of old, a very high threshold of pain. The act is being very insensible to pain. Even at times of agonizing torment, they that dwellers on the fringes of being respond with silence. The abnormal in their mind is confused with the normal, the monstrous with the human. Those people are speechless, wordless, soundless, they are silent people. You have to sell the view that man is vocal being because he has certain needs. He wants to gratify, right to assert, demands to articulate. He was granted speech in order to be able to define his needs, state his rights, demand or plead that society treat him with fairness. Complete insensibility to pain, to basic need and human rights, was equated with silence. Wherever there is need, there is sound. When there is no awareness of need, there is no sound. We were speaking about some people who lead a peripheral silent existence. Judaic existentialism has gone a step further. And was a little more frank. And instead of speaking of some people, Yehadu spoke of all people. In other words, man as such finds himself on the periphery of being. He dwells on the fringes of existence. Everyone, that's what Yehadu taught. If you study Tehillim, you'll find it almost in every second chapter. No matter how prominent and how active, no matter how rich a life he leads, he is in ontological bondage, in slavery. His existence is a silent one. Every man is speechless. Silent being, no matter how vocal and articulate and loud voiced he is. We have developed, please listen carefully, the equation of silence and the absence of a need awareness. Silence the person who has no awareness of his need. I mean, when we speak about silence, it's more, we use silence as as a metaphor. It's more a figurative speech. Silence means person is not aware of his needs. The slave was not aware of his needs. He is silent, whether he emits certain sounds or not is completely irrelevant. So the equation, silence means the awareness of need, the lack of the awareness of need. Vocal existence means an existence which is aware of its need. But of course, if one is aware of its need, he is also aware of his rights, and he has the boldness to demand justice. Yehadu thought that man in general is unaware of his need, and that's why man is a silent being. No matter how the most sophisticated and cultured person exhibits lack of knowledge of his basic needs and ignorance as far as his real destiny is concerned. Many times we desire the undesirable. and frequently we forget our fundamental needs. Even the personal experience is completely distorted. Many a time we are in agony while suffering is not justified, and vice versa. We feel no pain when we are in real trouble. Does the young man understand his basic needs? Does youth understand his basic needs? If he did, there would be no problem, what shall I say, of crime and drugs and dropouts, etc., etc. Apparently, young men usually don't understand the basic needs. Because the basic need of a young man is one: knowledge, education. The young man is blessed by God to have a receptive and retaining memory. I don't have it anymore. His mind is receptive, his memory is retentive. He's retaining. Retentive memory. He doesn't utilize it. Many don't. Do the middle-aged people know their needs, what is relevant and what is not? If they did, there would be less sudden death from heart disease. Does the old man know his needs? I can speak about many, I can speak about myself. I know that I'm ignorant. Sometimes I fear death. I'm very afraid. Sometimes I'm horrified by the thought of being, Rahman al-Islam, incapacitated during my lifetime. You don't know what to ask and what to pray for. To pray for many, many years, or to pray for an active, creative, fruitful life. I don't know. I know that I am confused, I'm perplexed. Sometimes I have a very strange phobia. I don't know how I developed it. The phobia that I'll be compelled by disease, or not only triple disease, by disease, to violate the fast of Yom Kippur. To me it's the ghost. I believe that if I have to violate the fast of Yom Kippur, so life becomes worthless. So if you ask me, do I know my needs? I'll answer you, no, I don't know my needs. I don't know what to pray for, or what to ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I leave it to him. Beside ignorance, we are all forgotten people. Who knows us? Who pays attention to us? Who is interested in us? In time of suffering and torment, the individual is alone, isolated from everybody, including his nearest and best friends. How long does it take for friends to get used to the cruel medical fact that one is incurably ill? How long does it take? At first you shudder, yes, you are taken aback, but it doesn't take long. It takes few weeks, few months, and one is used to a certain idea. How first friends and acquaintances reconcile themselves with a certain situation, and they gradually remove themselves psychologically from the person. When we say man is free, we understand that man is free to decide in favor or against the moral norm. That's exactly what we understand. Yes, we wonder if God created man in his image and finished and fashioned his personality, inculcating in him basic tendencies and patterns of behavior, how can man change the modus existential, the way of life which was chartered by his creator? How can Maimonides say that man is free? If God created man, and to create a man means not only the body, to create the body, to create man biologically, what means to create him spiritually. It means his character was inculcated in man, certain basic tendencies were implanted in him, God chartered the way of life. That's man. If God has fashioned man, so how can man be free? The conclusion, I believe, is a simple one. If man is free, because he is a partner of God, he participates in his own creation. Man is involved in his own creation. He is a collaborator, a partner of the Almighty Kaviyachol. Of course, the Almighty created man in his image, no doubt about it. Yet, Imago Dei, the image of God, is not to be treated as a datum that God gave man his image. Oh no. Not as a datum or a complete fact. Instead, it is rather an idea, I would say an ideal, a remote destination toward which man is supposed to keep moving. It is a twinkling star that fascinates man who attempts to reach out for that mysterious light. In a word, it is a vision, a challenge. God creates man as a peripheral being. Man is unfinished. He implants in him a latent, silent personality. It is man's task to make the centripetal movement from a mute periphery to a full, loud, and spitting center. Man is free because he does the fashioning of his personality. God wants him to make the design, to develop the basic concerns, to arrange the hierarchy of values, to convert silence, Halakhic silence, into morphological speech. That's why man is free. He and no one else sets the patterns and the way of life. I have always interpreted that the plural form which the Bible uses in telling us the story, the narrative about creation of man, the famous word, Naaseh. Question is, Naaseh to whom? To whom did God address himself? He said, we'll do it together. So one Midrash is addressed himself to the Malachim, to the angel. The Ramban says he addressed himself to nature. But I interpret differently. He addressed himself to man himself. Man was summoned to join the Almighty in creating man. God makes man a silent being. It's up to the latter to open up his own uncircumcised lips and to reach the stage of speech. Man is confronted here with a challenge and capacity or promise. First, man, in contradistinction to other creatures, cannot live as a human being and exist with dignity, which makes life a worthwhile affair if his activities are just spontaneous, natural, if his growth is like that of the animal, unplanned and incidental. Man, in order to meet all the human obligations, must prepare himself for life by instituting a long series of intentional acts whose prime purpose is to move from the silent periphery to the speaking center. He has to make his capability his own, gain control over them, and make himself a free and speaking individual. In other words, we have arrived at a new equation. Man, actually, what is man called? Man was called by God what to accomplish. What to accomplish. To the word nasa, to the plural form. What did God demand of man? What is he supposed to accomplish? To redeem himself. May he redeem himself from silence, from existential slavery, and shift and make the movement from the periphery to the center. And how can man gain that? How can man gain redemption? By what? By what? What do you call that? The Nase Odom. I said Nase Odom. Some people, it's not an abstract idea that man somehow was involved by God in his own creation. And God created man as a potentiality. He implanted a hero in him. I mean, just latent powers. But it's up to man to actualize those powers. To seize those powers and make them his own. To gain control over powers. Many people don't have control over themselves. A skilled person, a trained person, a person with ability, who is well prepared, I mean, has control over his own power, over his own talent. He can take advantage of his talent. While people, I mean, who led a spontaneous life, but cannot control themselves, have no control over themselves. They don't belong to themselves. So actually, what do you call it in English, in every language? This process that man gains power over his own talent, his own power. What do you call it in English? In everything. What is the process? I believe America keeps on talking about it. I mean, they spend billions of dollars on that. This is what you call education. What is education? Education means the involvement of man in the process of creation, if in his own creation. Not the creation of the body, no, that man can't do. But somehow man put the finishing touches to himself. Education comes to expression in the noon of nate, in the plural of nate. Had God said, Eshe Odom, there would be no need for education. Man would be like the animal. Whatever the animal can do the first week or the second week. Whatever the animal can do, and I would rather say 10 years. When it is 10 years old, it can also do the second week or the third week. There is no growth, there is no development, there is no preparation for life, there is no training for life. Had God said Eshe Odom, man would be like the animal. He would have been born on the same day for just all talent and had control over his powers. And there would be no difference between a man who is a year old or a person of 40 years of age. This nase, let us do it together. That's what made man a being who is in need of education. What does education mean? The process of developing his own powers, his own talent, his latent capabilities. This is the process of redemption. Because if man has no control over himself, he's a silent being. The very instant man gains control over himself, he's a speaking being. He redeems himself. So now you have a new equation. Education equals redemption. What is redemption? If not the deliverance of the slaves from the anonymity of a silent existence into the light of a storytelling existence. What is education if not the freeing of silent Halakhic powers and and endowing them with creative actuality and manageability? God created man a silent prisoner. It is man's job, to deliver himself and to become a free-speaking personality. Indeed, any teacher can tell you that. From his or her experience, that teaching is an act of liberation. Many times, I can give you an example of my own experience. Many times, quite often, I'm assigned a pupil whose scholastic record is not too encouraging, the mild statement. I inquire of his previous teachers or yeshivas. The answer is usually standard. A waste of time. Yeshivas say it, they have a nice expression for it. Adrochel vatola. He's in my class, of course, he comes into my class, he's a backbencher. Silent, not a single sound comes forth. I ask questions, I have to answer. Afraid to meet a single sound. It doesn't mean that he doesn't have latent powers, he has them. But somehow he's a prisoner. Somehow the previous teacher did not manage to free those latent powers and give him control over his own talents. That's what it is silent. It's a silent existence. He's still on the periphery of beings. Timid, meek, he's a little afraid. He is on the fringes of an enlightened speaking existence. Everything in him cries out for redemption, for liberation. And somehow I feel many times, I have the feeling, that by concentrating on that boy and trying to draw out of him things of which himself is ignorant, but which are in his mouth, within him, try to develop his powers, his latent talent, is an act of redeeming. What difference makes it between redeeming a slave from political captivity or redeeming a slave from intellectual captivity? I don't say that I'm always successful. Sometimes I fail miserably. However, quite often I succeed in being a redeemer. Little by little, I watch him, his eyes begin to shine, his face lights up, and finally comes the smile of redemption. The very moment he smiles, he begins to talk. Of course, before it is called, it's also just a voice. What he says is incoherent. What he says makes no sense. And he is actually hard of speech sometimes. He stutters a bit. The fright is the reason for his stuttering. But first comes the call, the voice, the sound. And next to the sound comes the word. He begins to talk. When he begins to talk, I don't know how much he appreciates it, but I am happy. To me, it's an act of redemption. I've taken a silent being, step by step. I shifted him from the silent periphery to the loud center. Isn't that almost a miracle? And this is exactly what God understood when he said, Nase Adam. It is up to man to finish the job. Redemption is education. Man is a silent being. Now, we have arrived at a new equation. Since A, let us now just concentrate. A is Q equals B redemption. Correct? We said before, we don't know yet how high. And B it means redemption, equals C, education. So of course, using an old premise of math, that if A equals C and B equals C, now if A equals B and B equals C, is A equals C. So since here prayer equals redemption, and redemption equals education, so then you have a new equation that tefillah equals education, prayer equals education. Or self-creation and self-formation, which is the prime task of man. We said at the very outset that the power of tefillah expresses itself in an attempt to influence not God's decision, but to give man another identity. Of course, we could not say what kind of change occurs in man on account of prayer. Now we are beginning to see the light. Prayer changes silent man into speaking man. Prayer liberates a mute existence from the shadows of nothingness. And the process consists of two stages. As before, the discovery made by man that he is a being in need. First of all, in order to pray, man must have the awareness of need. If there is no awareness of need, there is no prayer. That he must man must have the awareness that he must get certain things in order to live like a human, that certain desires must be gratified for the sake of making his life purposeful and worth living. A needless existence, like that of an angel, was rejected by us. Yahadus thought that man is superior to an angel. The only exception to the rule was Maimonides. But all scholars and all, in particular the Kabbalists, they said man is superior to angel. And why is man superior to angel? Because an angel has no awareness of need. Man has the awareness of need. And humanity means is to be equated with the awareness of need. Yahadus rejected a needless existence like that of the angel was rejected by Yahadus. The latter is interested, Yahadus is interested in human non-angelic beings, not an angel. When man finds himself, he discovers also his need, and simultaneously, with all this discovery, he learns something else, namely that he is a tragic being. By discovering if man discovers that he is a being in need, not everybody, modern man, has less this awareness. Modern man considers himself self-sufficient. But however, it is wrong. It's wrong, and man will never achieve self-sufficiency. But man, by discovering that he is a being in need, like our ancestors in Egypt, when Moses came and emitted the first sound, the shrill sound, that they are in need of freedom. Man discovered, man, if he's about to pray, he must make this discovery. I am in need of something, and of which I cannot take care. And by discovering need, man discovers something else. Namely, what does he discover? He discovers a very sad fact, but nevertheless it's a fact, that the Almighty will never gratify all his needs. Never. Never in life. Some, and to his chagrin, the most important and vital ones, at least what he considers important and vital, will never be satisfied. Never in life. So he makes one discovery. He is a person in need, and not all his needs will be gratified. On the contrary, what he discovers, what he considers basic and central, it will never be satisfied. So with the discovery and awareness of need, what else does he discover? That he is a tragic being. The awareness of human tragedy. To Yahadus it's important. If man considers himself a non-tragic being, so he cannot actually approach God. In this discovery of need, he also discovers that he is exposed to suffering. He finds out that God will never gratify all his needs. Some, and to his great sorrow, the most basic and important, at least which he considers basic and important, will never be satisfied. Hence man suddenly discovers himself in distress. And the first outcry, the first shriek, the first tear, and the first lamentation is this prayer. And then somehow, you know very well, Descartes, Cartesius, I don't know how you call him, he said once that the substance of man is this thinking, the ability to think. His famous saying, cogito ergo sum, since I think, apparently I exist. Now let us forget about the epistemological, twists which are involved in that sentence. But what Descartes wanted to express, that a non-thinking being is not mad. The greatness of man consists in his ability to think. Knowledge. So it's very typical of his age, which was the age of rationalism. Yahadus placed importance upon thinking, no doubt about it, very well. What great importance the intellect has in Talmud Torah, in the study of Halakha. The intellect is the final judge and the final arbiter about Halakhic matters. Very well. But however, Yahadus Judaism has not equated completely humanity with thinking. She said there is something else to man besides thinking. And apparently, if we should formulate saying Allah, that which was formulated by Descartes, we could say as follows. In English, I suffer, ergo, suffer, hence I do exist. In Latin, it would be more or less, dolorem fere, ergo sum. I suffer grief, that's why I am. Descartes' cogito applied not only to man, but to angel as well. The angel is also thinking, a thinking being. But the Judaic postulate applies only to man, not to angel. And Yahadus is interested in man as a man. Man is greater than the angel, superior to him. So in order to distinguish man from the angel, it's not enough to say cogito, I do think, ergo sum, therefore I do exist. But it's different. Dolorem fere, cati, ergo sum, I suffer. I'm a being in need. The angel has no need. I'm a being in need, and my needs will never be fulfilled. Some will be, some never. And the choice is not up to me. The choice is up to the Almighty. If men discover that he don't need it, and not only it will be fulfilled, so he discovers that being is a tragic affair. To exist, there is some tragedy to existence. The Lorem Fere, ergo sum. The very moment he discovers it, he is ready for prayer. What is the response to this discovery of need and discovery of tragedy in being, of suffering? What is the first response? How did our ancestors in Egypt respond to the discovery that they are in need of freedom, how did they respond? Vayizoku. They cried out. The first shriek, the first outcry. Of course, that happened in Egypt. It was prayer. It's not only a story related to Egypt. Every individual goes through this experience. For a while we think that is in no need. Usually young people don't think, they have no awareness of need. What they want is not to be created with this need as a trait of the human being. Man begins to discover need when he's middle-aged, and particularly when he approaches old age. Then he knows he's a person in need. He's a person he needs protection. Because he is confronted with death. And he knows that he'll lose the battle. Sooner or later he'll lose the battle. So he discovers his own tragedy. And of course the first response to it is an outcry, is prayer. That happened in Egypt millennia, years ago. That happens to everyone now. Jihadis, I want you to understand, Jihadis has rejected the quietist philosophy as tolerating silently a wrong done to the individual or to the community. Jihadis didn't like it. The Torah wanted men to cry out aloud against any kind, what shall I say, of affliction, react to injustice and pain immediately. For Yahadus held the view, wherever man is immune to pain and suffering, wherever he does not perceive the ugliness in life, the disproportionate and unjust, wherever he does not feel the spiritual pain of disgrace, the disgraceful situation, and does not shudder and cry out at the sight of Satan, is not capable to apprehend beauty. The awareness of need is usually the all-embracing awareness of man. Whoever is responds to need and to pain and to suffering, responds also to beauty and to kindness. Wherever is not frightened by the ugly can never be mesmerized by the lovely. Whoever feels no pain when encountering injustice is unable to, injustice done to himself, is unable to be a champion of justice. Whoever is not sensitive to torment or disgrace does not know what compassion and mercy stand for. The perception of the human need, the feeling of pain, when the gratification of the need is denied, the spontaneous negative response to the shameful and vulgar is indispensable for the progressive development of the human personality. People whose, what shall I say, threshold of pain is very low, the threshold of pain is very high. People who actually don't respond immediately to pain, who have no awareness of suffering, so-called, what you call them, happy-go-lucky. Such a type of people. What do you mean you say he's a person of happy-go-lucky? What I mean, as a psychological type, what does it represent? It represents he's not affected by pain so quickly as another person. There is a certain optimism in him, and he's worthy. It's not always a positive trait of a person. At times it's a negative trait, because the sensitivity to pain is identical with sensitivity to beauty and to kindness. If I'm sensitive to pain inflicted on me, I'm also sensitive to pain inflicted upon somebody else. It is the central awareness of need includes everything that is human and noble and beautiful. Prayer in Yahadus is, unlike prayer in the mystical literature, bound up with human needs. None of the person in need is called upon to pray. This is halachically correct. Halachically, prayer is the response to suffering. You know very well, Nachmanides, the Ramban, who did not list prayer as a Pentateuchic, as a Deraisa, mitzvah, as mitzvah, that during time of disaster, in the case of catastrophe, and actually man is confronted with danger, so it is incumbent upon men to pray. So you see in the Ramban that the reason for prayer, what is the reason for prayer? Halakhic reason, not philosophical reason. What is the reason for prayer? Is need, distress, or the awareness of need. When security of being, existential security is undermined, is moment. Even Maimonides, who considers daily prayer a Pentateuchic obligation, holds also the view that distress is the source of prayer. The awareness of need is the source of prayer. You know what the difference between Nachmanides and Maimonides is? Between Ramban and Rambam is not about prayer. They both agree that the reason for prayer is need, the awareness of need, the awakening of the awareness, and the human understanding, the human realization that he is in it, that existence is in it. What's the difference between Maimonides and the Ramban? Revolves about the concept of distress. The Ramban speaks of distress in terms of disaster, catastrophe. It comes from time to time, but it's not permanent. While Maimonides considers that man is always in distress, always in need, so there is always a place for prayer. But halachically, prayer is not him singing. I want you to know. If I listen to mystical literature, his prayer is him singing to extol God, to praise God, to sing hymns, to thank him. Halachically it's important, but they are secondary to petition. While the mystics laugh at petition. Petition, they say, is egocentric prayer, selfish prayer. Man wants God to give him riches and to give him prominence, to bestow upon him material blessings, completely unimportant, irrelevant. What do you need it for? What is prayer? Prayer means just the hymn, the enthusiasm expressed, and the ecstasy expressed through the service or through the singing of a hymn. That's according to the mystics. Yahadis is a different concept. The matter of fact is a Teidish Shemesre. Shemesre consists of 19 blessed benedictions, correct? How many benedictions are devoted to petition, and how many benedictions are devoted to praise or to thanksgiving? How many? You have 19 brachas. You have 13 brachas in the middle, which are completely devoted to petition. Fanatachim Lodem Das until Shemay Atzilah is petition, and petition. Request and petition. Petition for intelligence, petition for repentance, for health, for prosperity, for ingathering of the exiles and so forth. Of course, petition, individual petition, and community petition. Yes. As a matter of fact, these three last brachas, benedictions, if you discount just the one, is Retzei petition again, and Simsholem is petition again. So you have not only 13 brachas out of 19, which are completely related to petition, to so-called selfish, egocentric prayer, but you have 15 like that. Those benedictions which are related to praise giving and thanksgiving and hymn singing in the first three brachas, and maybe it's 4 brachas, that's all. 15 out. So you understand, because simply by watching this ratio between the laudatory prayer and the petitional prayer that Yahadus has placed its emphasis upon petition. Because, as I told you, a man in need who cries out is a sensitive man, has perceptivity, not only as far as he's concerned, but as far as others are concerned. Yahadus wanted man prayer in mystical literature is bound up with rapture, with a state of ecstasy. But prayer in Yahadus is bound up with human need. When a person in need is called upon to pray, to petition God for help, the Torah encouraged men to cry, to lament, to protest, to ask for help. With the awakening of the awareness of need, prayer makes its appearance. Without need, there will be many sources of prayer. Prayer in this stage is called what? Is equated with water. With water. Prayer in this stage is equated with water. Yes, but correct. Soko or Zoko. Soko or Zoko. It's very strange. We have the standardized brachas. Is one bracha is Baruch Atah Ad Hashem Shemei Akil Tzoko, and another bracha is Shemei Akil Tefillah, Shemei Tefillah. What's the difference between Tzoko and Tefillah? Prayer in the stage, in what stage? The stage of human discovery of his need. He feels that he needs something. He feels that he simply his existence is menaced. So he reacts to it. Prayer in this stage is equated with tzoko, with the shriek. Shemei Akil tzoko is one of the attributes of God. There is yet no clear understanding of what transpired. There is just pain and a loud cry. This is primordial prayer. Prayer in the primordial stage is the first awakening of human reality, the end of the silent and the beginning of a vocal existence. Prayer always, I want you to understand, prayer always begins at heart. And this is not just a phrase, it's halachically correct. Prayer is different from other mitzvahs. Take for instance the mitzvah of matzah, achilas matzah, or the mitzvah of sukkah, or the mitzvah of lulas. They are mitzvahs which exhaust themselves completely in the physical act. Physical act, actually. The subjective, the subjective correlate is completely irrelevant as far as the mitzvah is concerned. According to many Rishonim, there's a question that in mitzvah you don't even have to have the intention, to discharge your duty with this act. Even if I took the mirror, if I heard shofar and I enjoyed it because it's a beautiful sound, I enjoyed the musical note of shofar, according to many opinions, I fulfill my duty. So completely like shofar, like lulas, like esrog, like sukkah, it's completely those mitzvahs exhaust themselves in the physical deed, in the physical action. Of course, it's much more ennobling and much more elevating and enhancing if together hand in hand with the physical performance, man attains an experience, a great religious experience. But halachically, from the viewpoint of formal halacha, the experience, or so to say the subjective correlate, is not indispensable as far as the fulfillment of the mitzvah is concerned. However, as far as prayer is concerned, is prayer without kavanah. Prayer minus awareness of prayer is way the now. If we should just pronounce all words, for instance, if you're reading Megillah, through the night, without kavanah, according to many Rishonim, you discharge your duty. Whether you understood what the Megillah said, or you didn't understand. And many of us don't understand. Perhaps all of us don't understand the Megillah. I see not only the story which is being spelled out, but the story between the lines, you see. That we have discharged our duty, correct? Discharged our duty to fulfill our obligation. In prayer, if we don't know the Pirush HaMilos, we simply the semantics of the words, or we don't have the awareness of prayer. The latter is void and now and void. Has absolutely no relevance at all. What is the awareness of prayer? What is the awareness of prayer? When we speak about Kavanah, the Tefillah. The Tefillah minus Kavanah is not prayer. What do you have in mind? What do you have in mind? What awareness? The awareness of need. And what should the awareness consist of need? The awareness consists of two ideas. What's the idea number one? That I am a needed person. I am in need. And then no one else can help me but God. And God will not fulfill all my needs, but apart from that. Which part is up to Him. I have no right to interfere or to intervene or to tell God what need be fulfilled. I have a right to pray for every need. But I've got to know, I must know immediately that I am in need. Help can come only from God, and not all my needs will be fulfilled. This is Avodah Shebelev. The Rambam, by introducing the term Avodah Shebelev, has actually anchored prayer on where? Anchored prayer on where? In the heart. Prayer begins at heart, with the beginning of prayer. Prayer is a state of a tormented mind, it's an anxious mind, of an inner fear. It is the dreadful perception of the disharmony between man and reality, of the doubtful worth of the human being, of his inadequacy. This is prayer. At this stage, prayer is born in the heart and is externalized with tzedakah. Just to cry out. Cry out is midaraita, a key of prayer. The shriek, the outcry. Man left the silent periphery is an easy way to the center. However, you have this would be spontaneous prayer, you understand. You know, at the beginning there was no text for prayer, there was no statutory prayer, there was no standardized prayer. Each one used to simply pray spontaneously. As much as it could express was enough. This is the stage of tzedakah. You have the awareness of need, you have the awareness that God can help you, and you cry out to Him. That's all. This is the first prayer in my mind that speaks in the first paragraph of Tefillah, how prayer was, we prayed prior to the establishment of the Second Commonwealth. It was spontaneous prayer. Prayer consisted just in tzedakah, just in crying out. The Pasuk speaks about prayer. He'll spread his hands to that house. If a Jew spreads his hands, even if he doesn't say anything, and sighs, there is already midaraita. From the viewpoint of halacha midaraita, there is fulfillment of the mitzvah of tefillah. So the raita, what did the Torah demand that man? Just awareness of need and to respond to it. You respond, of course, by emitting a shriek or a cry, even wordless. As a matter of fact, when the Jews prayed in Egypt, Vayizoku, doesn't say Vayistalahu, Vayizoku, he just cried. Crying itself is prayer. However, later, when Ezra came and the Ashkenaz Sabbath, they have developed another concept of prayer, namely prayer through the word, not prayer via The voice, use the voice as the instrument of prayer. That prayer by employing the word. They have standardized the prayer. They have introduced a fixed text. Everybody has to follow this text. Why did they do it? What for? What was the reason for that? Why didn't they leave spontaneous prayer the way it was for many, many hundreds of years? Because the men of the Great Assembly, they wanted men not only to be aware of his needs. This is not enough. But I told you before, the Jews in Egypt were aware of their needs after Moshe's appearance. But none of them, including Moshe, understood the need. What do you mean understood the need? How to take care of, how to gratify, how to satisfy. When did they begin to understand their needs? Not only to feel their needs, but to understand their needs. When? At Mount Sinai. In prayer also, while the Torah is demanded of man, spontaneous prayer, according to Maimonides, no text, no definitive what shall I say, definitive sentences, no fixed posture, and not even, in prayer, and not necessary, with the right, it was not necessary for men to pray 3 times a day. Once a day was enough. Or rather, according to Maimonides, so you don't know exactly what Maimonides has in mind. According to Maimonides, whenever he felt his need, he had to pray. But of course, it was important for man to realize his need, not only once upon a time, but every day. But actually, with the right, his prayer is completely tied in with the awareness of need, with the perception of need. Anshe Sagdero advanced that. He said, no. This is the first stage of prayer. Yes, correct. This is the prayer in which our ancestors in Egypt every day. By Yidoku, they cried. They couldn't ask for anything because they didn't know what to ask for. They didn't know what to ask for. They didn't know that there is freedom in this world. They didn't understand that slaves for hundreds of years can be suddenly delivered. So by Yidoku, they cried. That's exactly the prayer which the Torah demands of man. The Rabbanan, Anshe Sagdero, have extended that prayer, that concept of prayer. Not only should a man feel his needs, but a man should understand them. And they introduced prayer whose instrument is not the voice, but the word speech. At the next stage, prayer is related to speech. Men find themselves intellectually, not only emotionally. When he discovers the awareness of need, he just finds himself emotionally. He has got to find himself intellectually. He finds himself not only in the perception of need, as I said, the Loren Ferre ergo sum, not only in the perception of need, but also in the conception of need. He thought as well as he feels. He begins to understand himself by grasping the meaning of his needs. Not only does the self reveal himself in the perception of need, but also in the conception of need. The Hadith in general has developed a doctrine of human need. If you ask me what is the crux of your Hadith, of all 4 sections of the Shulchan Aruch, what is the crux? What is it? It's a doctrine of needs and how to satisfy them. What is the Yeradeh? It's not the doctrine of dietary needs, the 4 Chelek Yeradeh, and how to satisfy them. What is second Chelek Yeradeh? It is the doctrine in certain sections the doctrine of human sexual needs and how to satisfy them. What is the Cheshmishkat preoccupied with? The doctrine of human need for capital, for property, human beings are not property. Goldsworthy has a bit called men of property, but it's not because the hero in that book is actually a man who understands only one need, the need to possess, and places possessions, material possessions above and beyond every spiritual need. But man is a man of property, basically. It's also need. It's recognized by Yahadus. Yahadus does not want to convert men into an animal. If men needs property, he has a desire for capital, for prosperity, let him have it. But there is a doctrine of need. How? Yahadus, and so forth and so on. Yahadus is developed a complete doctrine of human need, which needs are the primary and which are secondary. There is in Judaism a hierarchy of needs. More needs, more worthwhile, and less worthwhile. Constructive needs and disjunctive needs. Yahadus taught man how to gratify physiological as well as emotional and spiritual needs. Man not only should be sensitive to his needs, because if you are just sensitive, you have awareness of needs, and you don't understand your needs, then the method you apply in order to gratify the needs might be completely incoherent, completely distorted, and may inflict a lot of evil. Do you think that the young boy who uses drugs, he has also need? He need, I don't know. It's his fantasy, what shall I say, drives him, He has a need to achieve the impossible, or to enjoy a make-believe world. It's also need. So we all have a fantasy, we all have an imagination, we all want to enjoy something which is beyond and above this world. But Yahadus has taught man how to enjoy it. There is a possibility. Yahadus said, you want to enjoy Elam Haba, the world beyond and above, our sense world, Elam Shekunoteis, a world which is exclusively good. There is not a single element of diabolical element involved. So says, observe the Sabbath properly. If you observe the Sabbath properly, you will get a notion of what a spiritual existence is. Shabbos made Elam Haba, the Lord says. There's a doctrine of need. Man should not only be sensitive to needs, but he should know them as well. By knowing and properly evaluating them, he relates them to moral norms, and the gratification is edified. What was the purpose? The doctrine of need in Yahadus. What purpose did it pursue? What wanted Yahadus meant to do with his needs? What is the crux again of the Shulchan Aruch? Afei and Yeridei and Eben Lezer and Chesed Mishpat. Finally, what did Yahadus? Of course, we have the instructions, rules, criteria by which we should be guided in satisfying our needs. Yeah, but what is the philosophy of all that? What is the central idea? What is the central idea? Central idea is that the gratification of needs should become a service of God. Whatever man does should be a service of God. And the Rambam quotes the famous pasuk from Mishlei, the whole drochecho today. Know God, you know your ways. It means whatever you do should be a service to God. And that's why Yahadus is so remote from Christianity. In Christianity there is always two domains in Christianity. One is the, so to say, the secular domain, The second domain is the sacred domain. And somehow man divides his life. A part of his life is secular, his political life, his business life, commercial life, his entertainment. This belongs into the secular sector. Then there is the other sector, the ecclesiastical, the sacred sector. This is the church, this is the mosque, this is the prayer, this is the Sunday, the Lord's Day, and so forth, so on. The Hadith has never divided life into two sectors. There are no two sectors together. The whole world is one sector, it's one area. Either the whole world is contaminated, defiled, and corrupt, or the whole world may become sacred and noble and exalted. Because eating is a secular function according to Christianity. According to us, eating is not a secular function. It is a very important function. Very interesting. And you eat in the presence of God. If, for instance, and take a Jewish philosopher like Socrates, or Plato, or Diogenes, and tell him he would quote it, if you had quoted the pasuk to a Greek philosopher, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, tell us, I don't care who, but as far as this is concerned, we are unanimous. He would have quoted in the pasuk, in private, not to expose themselves while eating, because they consider it disgraceful function. Now this is a different approach. Eating may become a great service, a religious, moral, ethical performance, if eating is in accordance with the law. So there is, in a word, there is a doctrine of things. There is no division of orders into mundane and sacred, into moral and equal. Every segment of human life which is identical with the continuous, deliberate, purposeful, progressive exercise of human physical and spiritual talent is subject to Halakhic control and determination. So in prayer there is another kind of prayer. Not only response to the awareness of needs, but also response to what? To the understanding and knowledge of needs. Some people are not aware of their needs. Some people may be aware of their needs, but there is no knowledge, they don't have any knowledge. In prayer, man gains self-understanding by classifying his needs in accordance with criteria the men of the great assembly developed. And that's why a fixed text was introduced, a standardized prayer was established. Because Mishum Nesre is not just prayer, Mishum Nesre is a doctrine of needs. The need starts with the most request for intelligence. Very strange classification. Prosperity is the last of the needs, of individual needs. And so firsthand, Mishum Nesre is not only a text of prayer. It contains also a doctrine of needs. There's a classification of needs. The Rambam said, Shema vis tochi kol adam. Mishum Nesre contains all principles, main principles of human needs. It's the classification of human needs. And at this stage, may not only react to prayer spontaneously, to needs spontaneously, but he studies his needs, he understands his needs, and by understanding his needs, he classifies them well, and then tzedakah is converted into tefillah. What's the difference between tzedakah and tefillah? Tzedakah means to cry, to shout, the spontaneous response, which is not planned, nor is it intentional. It's more or less instinctual. You cry out. What is tefillah in Hebrew is a very difficult word. It's a word which is very good. They don't know exactly the semantics of tefillah, but we know one thing. As tefillah, the word, the term pillow Vayifalel refers to thinking. I didn't expect. I didn't think. I haven't thought that I ever see by faith. The lesson the feeling, and you should give according to the judgment. That feeling means knowing, thinking, judging, discriminating. Judging is always discrimination. So one prayer is talk, crying, this is Avodah Shabbat. With the Reise, the Rabbanon superimpose a new structure of prayer. Namely, what is it? Fear, understanding of me, and judging, and classifying, and discriminating. Now, Tefillah at this stage, Tefillah is not just a hazy, vague emotion, a creation feeling, it's more than that. It's a well-defined thought. It's a clear conception. Prayer expresses itself in knowledge of oneself. The intellect becomes involved. And yes, and here comes in what? Comes in speech. Once man understands it, and he discovers himself in thought, then man gains his speech. The Torah demanded that man objectify his thought in speech, in words, in complete sentences. And here, self-realization of man achieves the pinnacle. Why did the Torah demand that prayer express itself in speech? Why not? All right, to understand that prayer it begins with feeling, with an emotion, with awareness of need. But at the same time, prayer also should progress from emotion to thought. Why is the word necessary? As a matter of fact, there are among Chazal certain scholars who said that there is no need for speech. If a man thinks, says the prayer in mind, you know how you, like the way a person reads a book. But however, my mind did not accept that view. My mind accepted the view that you will lack the bottom. Thought, thinking, the word is not enough. You have to pronounce a word. Why is it necessary? Yes, because if you have to pronounce, you have to hear what you pronounce. Correct? Well, there is one opinion, as there is no need for pronouncing the word. If I just think the word, I visualize the word, it's enough. Visualization of words is enough. But my mind is not accepted. The Russia did accept it. My mind didn't accept it. My mind interprets that part is here and last to deal with it. So why is it necessary for speech? For speech. It's not necessary for talk, but it's necessary for speech. For a simple reason. Yehadus, I would say, acted sometimes, if I may say it, of course the term is in quotation marks, almost mercilessly vis-a-vis man. It may demand upon man, which man finds hard to fulfill or to comply with. The Hadith knew very well that there are many things which man knows well, very well, and still he has the courage to spare his knowledge out in the world. Many things we know. And when I don't sleep at night, I know many things about myself. What I would not dare to tell them to others, certainly not, but even to tell them to myself. I couldn't pronounce it. I still cannot say that, for the 5 years since this college, I still cannot say that my wife, I always feel pain when I say it. I have somehow I have no doubt about the fact. I know the fact is unalterable, and yet I have not reconciled myself with it. Somehow, knowledge alone has no control over the speech. Only that kind of knowledge with which man reconciles himself and accepts it may be crystallized into speech. Knowledge with which man hasn't reconciled himself cannot be expressed in speech. It's contrary to human nature. That's why the Torah has placed so much emphasis upon confession. A simple question. A man committed a sin, a mistake, an error. He repents. After repentance is an inner process. He regrets. He is in agony. And he commits himself to a different way of life. Then he cries. Then he's in misery and distress. His commitment is ironclad. He'll never change his mind. The Torah says, no forgiveness, no atonement. You've got to say chotosi, vazisi pashaiti, and this is not enough. You should specify what it is. You cannot say just chotosi, vazisi pashaiti. You should specify. V'yasisi is my man, he says. V'yasisi kach v'kach, and I've done this and that. Why is it necessary? Does it help? No. The inner process, something is completely without it. Why should... My mind says, if you did not confess, no matter how sorry he is, and no matter how strong his commitment is, as far as the future is concerned, there is no atonement. Why is there no atonement? When you swallow like it, you know why? Because it's very difficult for man. First of all, for man it's difficult simply to come to arrive at the conclusion that he failed, that his life is a failure. That is true. True means I arrive at the conclusion that I failed. Sometimes I failed as far as a certain act, performance is concerned, and sometimes in most cases, man should arrive at the conclusion that his life is a failure. From A to Z. It's very hard to say. A man who considers himself successful, in his very prominent society, should say, I'm a failure. He may think of it. He may know it very well when he spends his sleepless night. But it's very hard to say. Because it's hard to say, that's why you have these demands of him. You have the courage, and you'll be bold enough not only to think of thyself as a failure, but to say it loud, at least to oneself, that you have been a failure. And the same is true of Tefillah. Tefillah is express itself with thought. But thought alone is not complete if man lacks the courage and the boldness to express it in speech, in words. That's why Tefillah finds so to say its finale in the word. So Tefillah means man delivers himself from silence. He was a silent being. Basically, Tefillah is the great process of education. Education starts with unburdening oneself before the Almighty. First of all, silence. Man doesn't understand himself, doesn't understand his needs, doesn't understand his bankruptcy, doesn't understand his failure, doesn't understand his tragedy, he doesn't understand his life. And he begins to understand. And the Torah tells him, actually it is a commandment. Try to not understand. Try at least to see what's beginning. Who you are, what you are. And little by little he begins to discover his needs. Is there a moment to discover his needs? It's a needy person. And not all his needs will be fulfilled. So the first step toward so to say, toward a speaking existence. Toward a speaking individual. He was a silent individual who was made. Man got his voice. As it was in Israel. Next, the Torah says, all right, there was awakening, an emotional awakening. I expect you to awaken intellectually. Namely, not only to feel your need, but to understand your need. But what your needs are, how they should be gratified, and what can be gratified and what cannot. And here comes to which the Anship Nefesh Agdeva introduced. And thought is not enough. One should be courageous, not be a coward, to express thought in words. The very moment he expresses his thought in the word, so he is a speaking individual. The individual who approaches God before prayer, what kind of individual was he? A silent individual. This identity cast off. He was afraid, he was not free, he was a silent individual, he lived on the fringes of this identity is cast off. If there is a evil decree against man, the decree is rendered null and void, because the identity, silent identity, is vanished. There is another identity, namely what? A speaking identity, a man who feels his needs and knows his needs. And this is a different person, a different personality. And that's why God bestowed salvation and grace upon him. And the divine verdict is received. Yeah. Is that only